Well, this is it. I'm in downtown Lynchburg right now, and this is the art box. Now, for some of you who are heading off into college, you're going to have to start looking at your paints a little differently. The art box here works in more the higher end paints. Let me give you an example. If you were going to be training for the Olympic team in canoeing, you wouldn't buy a recreational kayak like these here. You would have to buy one of these, an Olympic boat. They run you about $2,000. And that's the same thing also in any other sport. An Indy 500 car, you're not going to get off the lot. You have to have that custom made. The paints here are going to be your higher grade paints. They're going to be the ones that are going to be utilized in the professional realm. Now, if you're heading into college, you're going to have to start looking at some of those paints. In high school, you can get away with your basics and even toy paints, as you would call them. Not in college. You're going to have to start looking at certain paints and how they're made and what brands you're using and what series you're going to use as well. So let's take a look inside and on this episode of Artifacts with oil paints and see what we have here. Come on, let's go. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of oil paints, many brands across the world. But most of the better ones are going to be found in Europe or here in the US. There's different types of oils, linseed oils, stand oils, glazes. These are the things that go into oils that you don't see in acrylics. In fact, some of the better paints, such as this one here, Gamblin, is made in the US. And you're going to find it's made very well. Old Holland is made in Europe. That's one of the best ones. And of course, Winsor Newton is made in France. And that's one of my favorites, in which I use. Another one is Williamsburg, and it's a handmade oil here made in the US. Now, all of these oils have charts, and these charts are going to tell you the different series. If you notice them, they go from 1 to 9, and some of them go from A to F. And take a look at the Winsor Newton, you'll see that there's no 3. Well, that happens every once in a while. But the main thing is to remember that a lot of these paints will number and letter. Take a look, for instance, at this one here. You can see that the number 1 is rather cheap, but take a look at the number 9. Yeah, it's rather expensive. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's head over into the studio and take a look and see what we have to do on working with oils. So back in the studio we are, as we said. This is what we're going to go over. All of this right here. So let's head out. Okay, voiceover man, take over. I know you're around here somewhere.
For more awesome content, like and subscribe now. Do it now, or I'll hunt you down. Smash like.
Oil painting?
Anything else?
Oil painting.
I would paint. I love painting.
I really love that painting.
I love your paintings.
Good oil paintings go for like $500.
Of Ming vases and all those rare oil paintings. And what
I love that idea. Paint me, paint me.
Well, I love those paints.
And I love to paint.
Over 10,000 oil paintings must be sold!
What happened to the oil painting hobby of his?
In a dining room with original oil paintings.
It's for an oil painting together.
Can I show an oil painting I made of us?
Spring. Oh, it's that time of year again. Birds are flying, bees are stinging. No, bees aren't stinging. But look at the colors of these flowers. Spring. Oh, it's that time of year again. Birds are flying, bees are stinging. No, bees aren't stinging. But look at the colors of these flowers. Just look at this. It's gorgeous, isn't it? This is what our house looks like. Isn't it wonderful? With the thaw of winter and now spring coming in. Makes you appreciate a lot of the four seasons. That's what we have here. Well, hey, we just passed our 1 year anniversary. February 22nd is when we started last year. So we've been at this for a full year. And now here we are, oil paints. Well, listen, we are going to take this into a two-part series. And the reason we're going to do that is because, well, a lot of that is, there's a lot to cover in oils. Oils is just, there is so much. It's not just a matter of using water and the paint as in acrylics. Now, don't get me wrong, there are things in acrylics that you can use. There are retardants that slow the drawing process down, but they're not as intense as we're talking about oils. And this is the reason why now we start getting into what we're talking about with oils and how there's so much to cover. So we will take the first part of this on this episode, and then next episode we'll go even further, because I really don't want to rush through everything, and it's going to take some time to go through all of this. Okay, so what you see before you here are the paints, brushes. Well, these brushes here is a simulation of brushes of what the brushes were like during the time of the Italian Renaissance, during, you know, thousands of years ago. As you can see.
Oh no! My dear Professor goofed again.
Good heavens, Cakes. Why did Mona crumble?
Well, my love, apparently the dear Professor got rather enthusiastic and, well, he stated that the Italian Renaissance was thousands of years ago and not hundreds.
Spectacular. I can see why she lost it. Cakes, you know that I know when the Renaissance was. I know that you know the dates, and you and I both know that the professor knows. But why don't you tell everyone what the dates were for that period?
Splendid idea. Okay. You see, the Italian Renaissance, which was a period of significant historical culture, knowledge as well as artistic change, is considered to have begun at or about the 14th century. Between 1300 and 1350, and ending at about 1600, the beginning of the 17th century. So you can see my dear Professor just gets carried away.
Fantastic work. Well, let's say we roll out of here and let the professor continue. We always have his back.
Oh, babe, you always know how to make me feel so special. I'm with you on that. Let's go.
The brushes aren't as what you would see today that we have. Then we have the linseed oils, we have the stand oils, we have the liquitin, and I'm going to get into all of this here. And then, of course, we have a small bottle here of terpenoid. Terpenoid now and turpentine are the same. The only thing is the odor is different, and I'm going to go into that. And you can see why, you know, we went through brushes, we went through acrylics, but you can see it's going to take a lot more to go into oils than it would be if we were just working with acrylics. And of course, the series numbers and questions such as, can you mix certain brands with others? And there's a controversy with that, and I'll go into all of that. Okay. Whew, a lot to cover. Well, what you see here is I have my paints are the Winsor & Newton. Winsor & Newton have been around for quite some time, and I pretty much, their inks are really reliable, but they've been getting into paints as well, and I've been finding that the paints have been working very, very well for me. I've also been using the Old Holland paints as well. So, and this one's a Michael Harding paint. But the question has been asked, which I've been asked, can you, or is it recommended that you can mix two different types of paints from two different brands? There are some purists who say absolutely not. If you're going to use a Winsor Newton, you stay with that Winsor Newton. If you're going to go with a Grumbacher, if you're going to go with any of those brands, you need to stay with that. Now, here's what I would say. I wouldn't mix any one of these European paints with a paint that is made in China or an inferior paint. It's just not gonna, the cohesion isn't going to be good. I just strongly wouldn't recommend that. Now, with that being said, would I mix a Winsor Newton with a Gambit paint? They're both high quality, and to my answer is yes, I would. However, with that being said, I would also watch out for the series. I wouldn't mix a Series 1 with a Series 2 or beyond. I definitely wouldn't want to mix it with a Series 9 or 7. The reason is those mixtures are made differently. You have a higher quality of paint. It would be equivalent to taking a pure white paint and then taking your paintbrush and trying to pull some of that white out. You're going to contaminate the white. That's the same thing with the series. If you're going to use a higher series, don't mix it with your Series 1. Stay with your Series 1. Keep your series separate. So if you're going to use, and again, this is where I'm going to say this is where the argument is. A Series 1 may be slightly different than a Series 1 in another brand. Probably isn't going to be that much difference, but there is going to be a difference. There will be a substantial difference between a Series 1 and a Series 4 or Series 2. So you wouldn't want to mix those up. So this is why it's important when you're buying your paint that you make sure you stay in that series. If you're going to, well, if you have, and here's a good example. Let's say you're using an Old Holland. You go to the store and you're on a Series 1. And Old Holland doesn't have a Series 1. They're all out. So you go over to Winsor Newton and you see that they have a Series 1 in the color that which you need. This is why I say it's okay as long as you stay in that series, especially if you're going to be doing a painting where they're at that level. It's the same thing with a Series 4, Series 5. If you're going to be using a Series 5, stay within that series. They're going to generally be the same, and their mixtures are going to be pretty much coherent and that coadhesive. So that's why I'm saying stay with the series. Be sure that you're with them, and you're not. It's more important, in my opinion, that you keep the series consistent as opposed to changing from brand to brand. Like I said, if you're a purist, and there are others, my other colleagues would say, no, you need to stay with those brands and keep those brands separate. That's a purist. Okay. And so, as you can see already in that you're already starting to get an idea. Now, this can be also applied to acrylics. You really wouldn't want to mix a student grade paint with a professional grade paint that you're using in acrylics. So this is the important part where you want to be watching out for what you have. And on top of that, when you walk in and you know about your series and you know what series you're looking for, it gives you more credence to what you're doing, and the people who are working there or people around you will know, oh, you know about your paints. And don't be surprised if you're looking at the series or you find somebody who turns around and says, why is this paint so expensive and this one not? you can explain that to them about the series and how it's processed and how it's made. Okay. Now, what I have here is, and I haven't really gone over pallets, but we're starting to get into that area where you're going to need to start looking at a pallet for yourself. Now, what I have here is a plastic pallet. If you're going to use a plastic pallet, the paint does have a tendency to stick to this once it's dry. So I would highly recommend, if you're painting and you're done and you're not going to come back to it for about a week and it's going to allow this to dry, you need to clean this off right away, especially with your oils. With your acrylic, you can actually let it dry and then you can peel that right off because acrylic doesn't stick to the plastic. Notice that it's white. You definitely want to use a white palette or clear because you want it to be the color in which you're using when you're painting on the canvas. If you use a wood type palette, remember that's a brown hue, and when you mix that with that wood, the hue is going to change. So you're not going to get the true color that you're putting on the canvas that you got from the palette. So either clear or you're going to end up using a plastic white. Now with the clear ones, what you can do is you can do a couple of things. You can buff that up and so it's not so see-through, or you can place on the back side a white sheet of paper, contact paper if you'd like. You can also do that with this if you'd like, contact paper, and then you can peel that off and then discard that and just get rid of that. Okay, Turpenoid. Turpenoid is utilized as a solvent to clean your brushes. Now, what's the difference between turpenoid and turpentine? Well, turpentine has an odor, and it's a very strong odor. I happen to like it, but you have to ventilate your room. Now, here's the thing. Turpentine also has, or turpenoid also has those fumes, so you also want to use this in a well-ventilated area. Just because the odor isn't there doesn't mean that the fumes aren't around. They are. Turpenoid is a man-made solvent, whereas turpentine is naturally made. And you don't want to use a paint thinner on your oils. No, that's not going to work. Okay, so what I have here, here we go, is the linseed oil. This linseed oil, or excuse me, not linseed, liquidin, is a solvent or an oil, or an oil that is used to mix with your paint. It can thin your paint out. You can also use this with a glaze. A glaze will also allow you to do that as well. But remember, there is a shelf life to this. It's about a year, but this is what happens. You can see it solidifies. It starts to granulate, or it starts to crystallize on the top here. And of course, if you open this up, which I have, you can see the mold is already built up on this, so this is no good. Once you start seeing this, you're not going to be able to use that as well. So this is what it looks like. It doesn't really change the color of your paints. The higher grade, the better. Your linseed oil is also going to be used to condition your brushes. I'd probably recommend after you've cleaned your brushes, is you dip them in here just to keep them conditioned. It's like a conditioner for your hair. There are others that we'll go over later on, but these are the two ones that you're going to be looking at. So you're going to start off with your turpenoid, your linseed oil, and your liquidin. And we're going to start working on those and show you how those mix and how they work in your paints. Again, this is not, we're not looking at painting style or technique. We're talking about the paint itself and the value of that paint. All right, let me see if there's anything else that I need to go over here before we start painting on canvas and start showing you how this is worked, because there are different types of ways to use that. You can use it, like I said, in a sfumato way, or you can use it in an impasto way. You can blend it, you can use it in different shapes and ways that you want to use your paints and how you're going to go about using them. And really, they're a lot of fun to be able to work with, and they're really a wonderful way to play around with oils. Now, here's the thing. When you're using brushes, you want to keep your two brushes separate that you're using for oils and you're using for acrylics. And here's the reason why. Even though you're going to have to really thoroughly clean these. And there may be some residual paint that will contaminate one paint versus the other. So it's highly recommended that you get 2 sets of brushes. I know, we're talking about cost, and you're going, well, there's a lot of, and this is where your priorities lie. Some of you have iPads, some of you have cell phones, some of you have computers. If you can afford that, you can afford to buy brushes that you're going to need for your classes and brushes you're going to need for to help improve on your work. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. We're going to take a little break, and we're going to start jumping into the paint itself of how this works. And I'm going to kind of demonstrate how Liquidton works and how you're able to tie all this up together. And you can see how it's not just painting very thin, but also painting thick and being able to utilize everything else that we have. All right, let's take this break. Yo, we're back. I was just kind of going over my, actually not mine, but book that I have about the rollerbots. Gotta start writing on them and keeping up on it. Okay, tie this baby up. Let's get back to what we were talking about. Set that aside. We're talking about oils. Okay, as I said, we're going to take this in a couple of parts because oils, unlike acrylics, really takes a lot more care and awareness of what you're doing and what you're putting together. Okay, first, let's talk about, we're going to kind of work backwards, almost like reverse engineering. And the first thing we want to do is, now, unlike acrylic or even watercolor, you can take a glass, fill it with water, and boom, there's your cleaner. And when your paint is dirty, you can just dump it down the drain and just get rid of it. It's, you know, it's not something that's going to contaminate the environment like terpenoid or turpentine. So here's where the beginning of the differences start. How and where do you dispose of your cleaner, and what do you put it into? Well, you could put it into a glass. You could take this and put it into a glass. However, that's not really the wisest way to use your turpentine or your turpenoid. You're going to most likely want to invest, and you're going to have what they call one of these. It's a cleaning tankard. And this is what you're going to use to fill with for your turpenoid and turpentine. So what I have here is, I will show you, I'm going to take my turpentine or turpenoid, open this up, and of course it's got a lid on here, okay, and I'm going to pour this into the container here. Now you'll notice, first of all, there's no odor to this. Turpenoid is a odorless cleaner, unlike turpentine, and it's kind of hard to find turpentine. I think a lot of people are getting away from that, and you can put a lid back onto this, and so now you have your container of turpenoid or cleaner here. Notice that this container has a net, and this net is used to put your brushes on so that all the deposits from your paint drop and fall to the bottom. Now, here's the thing that you're going to have to understand. You just can't dump your cleaners and dump them down the drain. Here's the reason why. I'm going to step back. I had been a firefighter for several years, actually 7.5 years. I was a firefighter, and in firefighting, you understand about chemicals and how they react. For instance, you never ever want to mix an ammonia and a chlorine together. You can create a poisonous gas. You never want to ever do that. Never, never, ever. Those are two chemicals you don't want to mix. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to mix a chlorine with petroleum. They will self-ignite. I've seen that happen, and it was done in an accident. As a matter of fact, I inherited 2 Dalmatians from this. As it turns out, there was some cleaning rags, and the dog next door, who happened to be a Dalmatian, had these pups, and the pups got into the rags and dragged the rags around, and they ended up dragging them near some solvents or some chlorine pellets, and they self-ignited and the house caught fire. All right, so what I'm trying to say here is that if you dump this down the drain, all dirty, just to clean this out, every sink has what they call a P-trap. It looks like this. Now, this P-trap is designed by plumbers to be able to catch anything at the bottom here. It just doesn't go straight down. It catches odors so they don't back up into your house and smell the house. So there's a purpose for that bend, that P-trap. The problem is on the bottom of that P-trap, that little hook right here, liquid happens to sit on that bottom there, and it kind of pools there, so it's not completely dry, and it'll sit there. If you take this here, and this is just one example, there's a multitude of other examples, but I'm just keeping this as just one example. If you take this and you dump it down the drain, some of this is going to deposit in that little niche that you see right here. If it does, and for you younger artists who are painting and you think you're getting away with this, mom is going to start cleaning with some sort of solvents, like any kind of chlorine, Ajax, Comet, or anything like that that has any kind of chlorine in it. And if she washes that down, it sits in there and mixes, yeah, it could catch. And therefore, depending on how much is in there and how soon that was, it could ignite a lot. But barring that aside, you're talking about chemicals that are being sent down the sewer, which go into the sewage, and then what's going to happen is you're just going to have this contamination of petroleum in the waters, and that's just, you just don't want to do that. It's just going to be terrible. So in that in itself, you just can't dispose as easily as you can with watercolor or with acrylic. So there's your first big difference between acrylics and watercolor, your cleaning solvents. So how do you get rid of this? Well, normally what happens is that when this is starting off brand new, but after time, your remnants or all your debris from cleaning your brushes start to pile up and thicken and thicken and thicken. Now, in some states, what you can do is that once it's full and gummy, you open this up, let it dry. Well, in oils it doesn't evaporate. They don't call it evaporation. It starts to solidify. And what will happen is it'll dry up solid. Once it becomes a solid, you can dispose of it. You can throw it out in the trash. It's no longer considered a hazardous material, but it has to be thoroughly dry. And thoroughly dry does not mean you have to wait 500 years, as I was saying, but it is pretty much thoroughly dry, and you can dispose of it. Put the lid back on and get rid of that. And you're not disposing of it as a wet hazardous material, because this is considered a hazardous material. That will allow you to be able to you would have to buy another tankard and then start all over again. But that will allow you to be able to get rid and dispose of something properly. Another thing you can also do is there's also hazardous disposal places that you can actually just dispose of this after it's completely dry and take that and dispose of it there. Again, this is something different in oils that they don't teach you about in school. So you have to be able to know that. Okay, so if I have my brushes I can actually dip into this and I can soak them and brush them out and clean them off on this here. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is paper towel. I can take my paper towel. Now, here's another problem. Once you have your paper towel and it's contaminated, again, you just don't want to throw this into a trash can. What I would highly recommend is put it into a plastic bag and then wrap that up in that plastic bag. When that plastic bag is completely full, take it outside, let it evaporate, let the odors, let them completely dry, wrap that plastic bag up. You can either take it to a hazardous waste materials place, or you can dispose of it in the trash once the chemicals have dried out. The tricky part is terpenoid has no odor, so you have to wait until this is completely dry. And these are the proper ways that you're going to get rid of your your paints or your what am I trying to say here? Your cleaning solvents. Okay. When you have your lid, you close this up, and now you're able to use this again for another time, and you don't have to continually going back to your terpenoid. And keep this in a clean place where you don't have to turn around and use this container. You have this, it's clean, it's non-contaminated. This is what's going to be contaminated. Now, this here is a cleaning tankard, and this can be used. What you can do is you can either put your cleaning solvents, you can put your linseed oils in here, and what you can do here is you could use this container as the same as this, but keep in mind though, this is a little more expensive. You can purchase one of these for about $6 or $7. Okay, this is going to run you about $30. So you want to have this and reuse it and take care of it and have you last for a while. And what you're going to do is you can fill this container up to about here and have your linseed oils in here, let your brushes soak in this, and you want to keep this pretty much clean, and that's what this container is used for. You don't have to purchase one of these. This is almost kind of like a gimmick thing, and as you start to become more proficient in your arts, you'll see certain things that, hey, you know, that looks pretty cool, things that you won't necessarily need, but things that you're going to want. And this is one of the ones that I saw and said, ooh, this is kind of cool, I like this. So that's what this is for here itself. It's also got a tight lid so you can transport this. That's also too with this here, you can transport this when you go out and you're doing on-site or you're doing plein air drawings. Now plein air drawings are exactly what the Impressionists did. They would actually go on site and they would paint there on site, knowing as plein air, as you're painting out there in the open. All right, so let's get started on this here. What we're going to first start off with is kind of show you the techniques, not the techniques, excuse me, about the paints and how they work on this here. So let's take a look at this and show you how these paints work. As I've shown you here, now I'm not going to put any of these paints on the canvas, not on this one here. I'm going to show you how these linseed oils work. I'm going to use the liquid in here and mix that in with my work and show you how this works. You know what I'm going to do? I am going to move my mat board cutter out of the way. Slide this right over here. There we go. And this will give us a little more room here. There we go. And we can see how I'm going to be working on this here, the board itself, or excuse me, the pallet itself. When you're using your pallet, you'll see this oval cut here, and you'll have this notch here. It's designed to either hold this way. I tend to hold mine like this. I don't even use this notch right here. When I bowl, I don't even use all 3 holes. I use only 2. Allows me to spin the ball. So just because you have this notch here does not necessarily mean you have to use that. There's different ways to use it. I have seen some artists use it like this. I've seen them use it like this. I happen to use it like this in itself. And keep it away from where I am myself. All right, so I'm going to start off with, I'm going to use some of this Michael Harding paint here. Now, as you can see, there's this oil in the paint. Now, remember when I talked about the different series of paints? And I used a comparison. I used an analogy about using white paint, and if you contaminate that white paint, it really doesn't remain pure. Well, it's kind of a poor analogy. Here's a better analogy. Imagine going to the gas station. Now, when you go to the gas station, you'll see 3 different grades of gasoline. Now, if you're using a higher octane, a 90, you're not going to want to put an 82 or a lower grade octane, because that octane now isn't as effective. You don't mix those octanes. You really shouldn't. If you're going to maintain a full tank of gas, then you want to maintain that higher octane or lower octane, because it's just messing gases up. But you can go from one gas station to another. You could go to a Marathon or a Union 76 or a Chevron for those of you on the West Coast. But you want to stay with the same octane. Paint is the same way. You can change and go from different brand to brand, but you generally want to stay within that series. So you want to stay in that series that you're using, because when you change that, as I said earlier, it changes the texture, it changes the composition of that quality of paint that you've been using. And especially if you're using a Series 7 or even a Series 4, and you come in with a Series 1, you've just wasted your money. You've just thrown your money down the tube on a Series 4. So that's why I say it's important to keep your series separate and don't let them get mixed up together. All right, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow here and open these up. There we go. And as you can see, the paints are rather thick, and you can thin these out with your liquidin. And liquidin is also acts as a glaze. Here's the other thing: when we start to get into glazes, when you use a glaze on your work, because adding glaze on top of your work brings out the color and makes it look a lot more brighter. It becomes richer. Now, here is the controversy. When I was going to school, the rule of thinking was, and I'm going to leave this up to you, or if you want to listen, ask other professors. The rule of thought is you don't want to glaze your paint. Do not glaze your paints as soon as you're done painting. Here's the argument behind that. Remember I said it takes about 500 years for paints to thoroughly dry. Well, it takes about a year for it to dry completely to the touch. It's still wet, so it takes about 12 months for that. If you put a glaze on top of that, the theory behind that is that it will start to turn around and you will create a barrier where the paint can't breathe, and therefore will start to begin to where mold will start to begin to build underneath that. So what you want to do is you want to be able to let that dry out. Now, we have heard that if you paint your glazes immediately after you've painted, they will dry simultaneously, so there isn't that seal. There's an argument to both sides. I'm still of the old school where I wait a year before I glaze anything to give that paint a chance to dry. That's going to be a decision you're going to have to make, or discuss it with your other professors and find out what they feel and what they say. In fact, don't even mention anything that I've mentioned this here. See what they have to say. Then you can tell them, well, the professor has said this on Artifax that he's been in. I've been doing this for 50 years, so you can let them know I'm not just somebody who's just come out here working on it. I may be new to this, but I've been painting for a long time. So anyway, that's one thing that you're going to want to remember. Okay, I'm going to add one more color, which is going to be my red. I'll use this one here. This is going to be my... Woo! I'm using my 3 primary colors here. Oh yeah. And using the oils, just even squeezing them out, you can tell automatically that there is a big difference between the paints in which I'm using here as opposed to the acrylics. Look at the oils that are spilled up around the edges here. Now, let's say that you want to accelerate the drying time. You want to speed that up. Well, there is. It's called a cobalt dryer. I'll show you that to you. I didn't bring it out. But you only want to use a couple of drops. If you use a lot more than that, I can guarantee you within an hour, your paint will dry. It accelerates the drying process very quickly, and you can end up using that really fast if you're pressed for doing a painting or trying to rush to a deadline. All right, so here I've already dipped my paintbrush into here, and as you can see here, I'm going to take some of this paint here and mix this up here and create a wonderful looking purple here, okay? And I'm going to pull this out and utilize this. Now, if I take my liquidin, I'm going to open this up. Live TV. Child protective locks. And I can pour a little bit of this liquidin onto my paint. What this does is it creates a glaze on the paint. It makes it a little more richer. Oh, I love the smell. And it thins out the paint and allows me to be able to utilize this and brush this even more. Okay, look at that, huh? Pull this out. Now, I am not painting anything on the canvas. I'm just basically showing you how this is utilized and how oils work and the differences between that. All right, so now I'm going to add a little bit of white. I'm going to pull out my Gamblin. Now, there are several different whites. You have what you call a titanium white, and there's also a flake white. Now, the flake white tends to be a little less opaque, and that's used for mixing your color, and it doesn't change the hue. It pretty much keeps it intact, but allows you to be able to thin that color without it getting whiter, because it's not as opaque as titanium white. And now I can pull this up and look at that gray. Look at that, huh? And this is what we get when we're working with oils here, utilizing these to be able to build up on this. Okay, so look at that. So I'm starting to run here on the side. All right. We're going to end this episode here. I've kind of delved into a lot about working in the different color, well, the 3 primary colors here, and kind of giving you an idea how these textures work and how they're working together and the differences between the two, the cleaning solvents. And I'll show you here. Once I grab my paint and I need to bring my brush, look at that. I use that net and utilize this. Now in the next episode, I'm going to show you how the particles drop to the bottom, and they're used to keep the brush away from the contamination of that. Woof. And you can actually leave that on the brush like this and not have to worry about it touching the bottom of your of the contamination, which will follow the bottom of the jar. All right. When you're done with your brush, you definitely want to wash that out with soap and water, and then add just a touch of linseed oil, just enough to condition it. You don't want to saturate it with linseed oil. All right. Well, as always, may the Lord be with you always. And next week, what we're going to do is we are going to actually take this paint and then apply it onto a canvas, and then kind of show you the different styles and how they work. I'll use some of the palette knife, I'll use some of the brush, and hopefully give you a chance to just utilize some of these paints. Now remember, if you're going out to buy these oils, remember that you're going to have to buy the containers, you're going to have to buy the you're going to want to buy the terpenoid right here, and then you're going to want to buy your 3 primary colors. And you can start off with your small tubes like this. These are your this is a series 3, wow. These are your 40 millimeter paints, as opposed to this size here. You can see these are much larger here that you're going to be using. This is 200 millimeters of oil. So you can start off with that. But if you're in college, this is the kind of size you're going to know. One of these tubes here is going to run you about 20 bucks. That's series 1. I'm telling you, if you're going to get into, you're not going to have to buy a lot of student books, but your materials and arts are expensive. Shop around, take a look at these. They're going to be about 20 bucks. Right there, that's 60 bucks if you're going to buy your 3. And if you're going to get 4, they're just under 100 bucks. And that's just on the tubes of paint you got. You haven't even gotten in for brushes. You haven't even gotten for your terpenoid. You haven't even gotten into your liquid tin. You haven't gotten into any of that in all your brushes. So that's why I say, even now, you should start thinking about what you're going to put together and how you're going to put these together. All right, so next week, we're going to start taking all this, applying it on the canvas, and we will see you on the next episode of Artifacts in this area of oils. Catch you on the next flip turn. Flip turn, get it? It was so sweet. Yeah.
Pantrabamba!